You don't
He ordered
understand. We
his
can't
wife to
stay
leave the
here.
party.
They know we're
Moments
here.
before her secret king father
We
entered,
just need a moment to think.
nobles in their finest silks and velvet moved gracefully across the polished surface, laughter and the soft notes of a harp mingling in the air. It was a night of splendor, a celebration of power and prestige. Yet beneath the glittering surface, shadows of secrets moved silently, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Lady Alara entered the hall, her soft steps barely making a sound on the cold marble. Her gown was deep sapphire, almost blending with the shadows of the tall arches, but it caught the light just enough to show its elegance. Her mask, delicate and silver, hid the top half of her face, leaving only her eyes visible. They were eyes that had learned to hold secrets, eyes that had learned to be cautious, eyes that could hide a truth dangerous enough to change the fate of kingdoms. As she moved through the crowd, heads turned. Whispers followed in her wake. Some admired her beauty, others speculated about her mysterious nature. Few knew the real truth. She was not just another noblewoman. She was the daughter of a king from a distant land, a king who had forbidden her presence in the public eye. Her existence was a secret carefully guarded, a truth she carried alone, tucked safely away beneath layers of etiquette and grace. Lord Kale stood near the grand staircase, observing the hall with quiet authority. His posture was perfect, yet there was an intensity in his gaze, a subtle weight that hinted at past burdens. He noticed Alara immediately as she entered, the way her sapphire gown brushed the floor, the way her eyes scanned the room with both curiosity and caution. Something about her unsettled him, though he could not name it. He had seen many noblewomen in his life, but none had carried themselves with such quiet strength, nor had any stirred an unfamiliar restlessness in him. As Alara approached a group of nobles discussing politics and alliances, Kale stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Alara," he said, and the hall seemed to quiet slightly at the sound. People noticed the command in his tone, the authority that demanded attention. "You should leave the party." The words landed like a hammer. Alara froze for a moment, surprise flashing across her face. "Leave?" she asked softly, almost in disbelief. Now, Kale's eyes met hers, unyielding. "Yes, it is not safe for you here. There are matters you must not witness." She felt the burn of embarrassment as the noble crowd turned to look. Their eyes were not cruel, but they were intrigued. Who was this Lord Kale to command her in such a manner? Yet there was no mistaking the strength in his voice. Alara knew that arguing would not only be foolish but dangerous. She nodded, lowering her gaze, her hands tightening slightly at her sides. "As you wish," she murmured and began to move away, her footsteps measured, careful to keep her composure. Once outside, the garden welcomed her like a secret refuge. The moon cast silver shadows on the hedges and stone paths, creating patterns that danced across her face. The night was cool, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and roses. Here, away from the eyes of nobles, Alara allowed herself a moment to breathe. She sank onto a stone bench beneath a flowering arbor, her mind racing. Why had Kale done this? Was it concern, suspicion, or something else entirely? She had always known he was a man of power and influence, but she had never understood his motives. And yet, despite the sting of humiliation, there was a strange pull in her chest, a tension she could not explain. Something about him unsettled her, fascinated her, and even frightened her all at once. Kale, standing at the edge of the garden, watched her from the shadows. He did not approach immediately. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched at his sides. He was a man accustomed to control, to making decisions for others without hesitation. But Alara was different. Her presence demanded restraint, demanded that he measure his actions carefully. To send her away so abruptly had been both cruel and necessary, a balancing act between duty and desire that he could not yet untangle. Meanwhile, the palace behind her continued to hum with life. The laughter, music, and clinking of glasses seemed distant, almost unreal in the quiet of the garden. Alara wrapped her hands around her knees, thinking of the secrets she carried. Secrets that, if revealed, could shake the foundations of this very court. Secrets that Kale might already sense, though he had not spoken them aloud. She had always been trained to hide her identity, to move silently through the world as a shadow. But in Kale's presence, she felt exposed, vulnerable in ways she had never experienced. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, a tension that neither dared to break. The stillness of the night was suddenly interrupted by the distant sound of carriage wheels on the palace stones. Alara lifted her head, curiosity sparking. It was unusual for visitors to arrive at this hour, and the sound carried a weight she could feel in her bones. As the carriage drew nearer, a hush seemed to fall over the garden, the night itself holding its breath. Kale's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, though he remained in the shadows. The sound of the carriage was familiar to him, though he could not yet place it. His instincts told him that this was no ordinary guest. He sensed the shift in the air, the sudden tension that pricked at his mind. Something was coming, something that could change everything. The carriage stopped at the grand entrance of the palace. Two heralds dismounted and unrolled banners that caught the moonlight. The letters gleamed in gold, announcing the arrival of a king from a distant land, a king whose presence was both unexpected and dangerous. Alara's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the name instantly, though she had never seen him in person. This was her father, the man who had forbidden her from revealing her identity, the king whose shadow had always loomed over her life in secrecy. Kale, hidden in the garden, stiffened at the sight. His mind raced as he realized the implications. He had known that Alara was special, that she carried a weight beyond her years, but he had not anticipated this. Her father's arrival could expose her secret to the world, changing the delicate balance of power in the palace, and perhaps even endanger her life. Alara felt a mix of fear and awe. Her father's presence was commanding even from a distance, and she could feel the pull of loyalty and longing twisting within her. She had never met him, yet she had always known him as the source of both her protection and her imprisonment. Now standing in the quiet garden, she understood that the moment of truth had come. Kale stepped forward from the shadows, his figure tense and alert. "You should not be here when he enters," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He will recognize you. He will see what you have been hiding." Alara met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting fear, defiance, and a strange hope. "I cannot hide forever," she whispered. "Perhaps it is time the truth is known." Kale's expression softened, though the tension remained. There was admiration in his eyes mixed with worry. "Truth has its price," he said quietly, "and sometimes it is heavier than we can bear." A silence fell over them, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. The world beyond the garden seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The moment stretched, charged with unspoken emotions, fear, longing, and a connection that neither could deny. Then, from the palace gates, a trumpet sounded. The heralds announced the king's formal entrance. The guards bowed, the courtiers whispered, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the marble halls. Alara's father had arrived, and the delicate web of secrets, power, and desire was about to unravel. Alara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew that whatever happened next could change her life forever. Kale's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that carried warmth, protection, and an unspoken promise. She met his eyes and found in them the reflection of her own conflicted heart, the fear of exposure, the thrill of forbidden attraction, and the hope that perhaps, even in the shadows, she was not alone. As the doors of the palace swung open to reveal the king in all his regal splendor, Alara rose from the stone bench. Her heart raced, her mind sharpened, and her soul braced for the storm that was coming. The masquerade of life, the delicate dance of power and secrecy, was about to face its greatest challenge. And in the silent garden, Kale watched her with a mixture of admiration and dread. He had sent her away to protect her, yet now he realized that the real danger and the real revelation had only just begun. The grand hall of Evercrest Palace had transformed from a place of music and laughter into a chamber thick with tension. The arrival of the distant king had shifted everything. Noblemen and women now stood in hushed clusters, their conversations reduced to whispers, eyes darting nervously between the new king and Lady Alara, whose hidden identity now hovered on the edge of exposure. Alara's sapphire gown flowed like liquid night as she stepped cautiously among the crowd. She had chosen to follow Kale's advice earlier to leave the party, yet her instincts had pulled her back. The sight of her father, regal and imposing, struck her with a mixture of fear and awe. Her pulse quickened, and for the first time she realized that the life she had carefully hidden might unravel in an instant. Kale stayed a few steps behind, his gaze fixed on her. He had not moved her to the garden lightly. He had sensed the potential danger, had sensed the ripple of power and recognition that might arise the moment her father entered. Now, seeing the king, he felt the weight of his decision. Protecting Alara meant more than guiding her away. It meant anticipating every possible threat, every glance that could reveal her secret. The king's eyes swept across the hall. They were sharp, intelligent, and unforgiving, yet they softened when they finally rested on Alara. A silence settled, the sort that could be felt in the bones rather than heard. She froze, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum heralding an approaching storm. Kale reached her side and whispered, low enough that only she could hear, "Stay calm. Do not let him see fear." His hand brushed against hers, a subtle anchor in the tempest of uncertainty. The touch was brief, yet it carried the reassurance and tension of a bond neither dared name aloud. Alara nodded, though her throat felt tight. She straightened, lifting her chin to meet her father's gaze. "Father," she whispered, the single word carrying centuries of unspoken longing and hidden years. The king's eyes widened slightly at the recognition, a flicker of surprise that quickly transformed into a controlled expression of authority. He descended the steps from his carriage with careful precision, each movement deliberate, measured. Courtiers and guards parted instinctively, the space around him charged with unspoken reverence. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "It seems that the rumors of your presence were true." Alara's chest tightened. Rumors had always surrounded her, whispers of a distant daughter, yet no one had dared confirm them. Her secret life had been carefully orchestrated to remain hidden from both palace eyes and foreign kingdoms. Now, under the gaze of her father, that careful balance threatened to crumble. Kale stepped forward slightly, his presence a protective shadow. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, his tone steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. He had known much about her, but the weight of this confrontation, the presence of the king, the realization of her secret lineage, pressed upon him like a living thing. The king's gaze flickered to Kale, measuring him with a cautious intensity. "And you are?" he asked. There was no malice, only calculation, the kind that could pierce through layers of pretense and deceit. "Lord Kale of Evercrest," Kale replied, bowing slightly. "A servant of the palace and a guardian to Lady Alara." The king's eyes narrowed, studying him as though weighing the truth of his words. Kale did not flinch. He had always carried a certain command in his posture, a strength born of both intelligence and experience. Yet now, in the presence of the king, he felt the gravity of forces he could not fully control. "Guardian," the king repeated, his voice quieter this time, almost contemplative. "It seems my daughter has chosen her companions wisely." Alara felt a strange warmth at the acknowledgement. Her father, whom she had imagined as distant and unapproachable, had now spoken words that carried both recognition and subtle approval. But the feeling was fleeting. The weight of expectation, of hidden truths and potential danger pressed down upon her once more. Kale's eyes remained fixed on her, sharp and alert. He sensed the subtle tension in the king's tone, the layers of judgment hidden beneath polite acknowledgement. Every word, every gesture, could carry consequences far beyond the comprehension of ordinary nobles. And Alara, standing at the center of this storm, seemed blissfully unaware of the magnitude of the risk. "Come," the king said finally, motioning for Alara to follow him to a more private chamber. "We must speak of matters that cannot wait." Alara hesitated, glancing at Kale. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, a signal that he would be nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Trust, she realized, had never been so vital, so fragile. The king led her through quiet corridors, away from the watchful eyes of courtiers. The walls, adorned with tapestries depicting battles and coronations, seemed to close in as the weight of history and duty pressed upon her. She felt as though she were walking through the echoes of her own life, steps carefully choreographed, yet dangerously unpredictable. Once in the private chamber, the king turned to her, his expression softened but no less commanding. "Alara," he began, "you have grown into a woman of both beauty and strength, but your presence here is not a coincidence. You carry responsibilities, both known and hidden, that will shape the fate of kingdoms." Alara swallowed hard. "I have always tried to honor your wishes, father," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I have kept my identity secret as you asked. I have lived in the shadows to protect the peace of this land." The king nodded slowly, as if weighing her words against the truth he sensed. "I know, my daughter, yet secrets, even those held with the purest intentions, can become chains. It is time for you to understand the full measure of your heritage and the power you hold by simply existing." Outside the chamber, Kale waited. Though unseen, he could feel the shift in the air. He had always known that Alara's lineage carried weight, but the realization that the king had arrived to address it directly filled him with both concern and admiration. Her secret had been well guarded, yet now it was exposed to forces beyond his control. Inside, the king continued, "There is a curse upon our bloodline, a shadow that has haunted our family for generations. It lies dormant, yet its threads reach far, touching those we love most. You, Alara, are bound to it by birth. And though you have hidden, it cannot remain so forever." Alara felt a chill run through her. The idea of a curse was not new. Whispers of it had reached her ears in childhood, half-formed stories meant to instill fear and respect. Yet hearing it confirmed by her father so clearly brought a weight she had never known. "Can it be undone?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Can it be stopped?" The king's expression darkened. "Perhaps. But it requires courage, wisdom, and alliances that are not easily formed. You will need guidance, Alara, and trust in those who may challenge you as much as they protect you." Alara's thoughts immediately went to Kale. She knew he was strong, capable, and loyal, yet he carried a temper, a pride, and a force of will that could clash with even the most careful plans. And still, he had always protected her, even from the dangers she did not fully understand. Could he be the ally her father spoke of? Could he help her navigate the storm that was approaching? Her question remained unspoken, as the king's gaze seemed to pierce her thoughts. "There are those who will seek to manipulate, to claim what is yours. You must be prepared to face the shadows of both this world and your own heart." The words struck her deeply. She had spent years learning to navigate the court, to hide her lineage, to manage the whispers of nobles. Yet she realized now that the real test was not in secrecy, but in courage, in facing the truths she had long avoided. Kale's hand on the doorknob outside tightened slightly. Though he remained silent, he understood. The challenge ahead would require both of them to act with intelligence, strength, and a measure of restraint they had yet to fully practice. The tension between them was undeniable, a mixture of trust, desire, and the fragile balance of power. The king's voice broke through her thoughts once more. "Alara, you must decide. Will you embrace the responsibilities of your birth or continue to hide, risking the fate of all you hold dear? Alara met his eyes, her own steady despite the storm within. I will face it, she said firmly. I will embrace my path, whatever it may bring. I cannot remain hidden forever. The king nodded, a rare warmth softening his features. Then you are ready, but be warned, the journey ahead will not be easy. And the shadows you face may test the bonds you hold most dear. Alara's heart tightened at the words, and for a fleeting moment she thought of Kale. She knew the path forward would demand courage from both of them, and that the delicate tension between love, loyalty, and duty would be tested like never before. The moment stretched, charged with unspoken emotion and anticipation. The arrival of the king had changed everything. The secret she had carried alone was no longer hers to guard entirely. And outside, Kale remained, a silent sentinel, aware that the decisions made within that chamber would ripple through their lives forever. The distant sound of the grand hall resumed. The faint murmur of nobles, the rustle of gowns, the clinking of glasses. But for Alara, the world had narrowed to the space between her father's gaze and the weight of destiny pressing upon her shoulders. She realized then that nothing would ever be the same. The masquerade of shadows and hidden truths had ended, replaced by a reality that demanded courage, intelligence, and heart. And as the king prepared to guide her through the revelations to come, Alara understood that the true test of strength was not in hiding, but in facing the truth and the consequences of revealing it. Cliffhanger. Outside the chamber, Kale felt the shift in the air, the quiet certainty that Alara's path was about to collide with dangers far beyond the palace walls. He knew the curse her father spoke of was real, and that someone in the court would move against her the moment they sensed her true identity. And in that instant, he realized that protecting her might demand everything he had, including the very heart he had long tried to guard. The castle corridors were quiet, lit only by flickering torches that cast long, trembling shadows across the stone walls. Evercrest Palace, which had earlier shimmered with light and music, now felt like a place of secrets, a labyrinth of whispers and hidden dangers. Lady Alara walked with measured steps, her sapphire gown brushing against the floor. Though her face remained calm, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had just spoken with her father, the distant king whose presence had shifted everything in her carefully hidden life. His words echoed in her ears, heavy with warning and expectation. There was a curse upon their bloodline, he had said, a shadow that had haunted generations. And now, she, Alara, had become a key in a chain of fate she could no longer avoid. Kale walked a few steps behind her, his presence both protective and tense. He had accompanied her silently since the conversation with her father, aware that her every move was under scrutiny. He had always been capable, strong, and commanding, but tonight he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing upon him. The shadows around them were not only cast by torches, they were also cast by secrets, by dangers unseen, and by the invisible threads of destiny that now entwined them. "Do you understand what is expected of you?" Kale asked quietly, keeping his voice low enough that no wandering ears could catch it. Alara nodded, though her heart felt heavy. "I think so," she replied. "But the truth, the curse, I do not fully understand it yet. My father spoke in riddles as if he expects me to already know the path I must take." Kale's jaw tightened. "Sometimes knowledge is revealed only in action," he said. "You cannot prepare for everything. But you can choose whom to trust, and you can decide how far you are willing to go to protect yourself." They moved deeper into the castle, down a hallway lined with tapestries depicting battles, coronations, and long-forgotten kings. The images seemed to watch them, the faces in the fabric lifelike in the torchlight. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She was surrounded by history, by power, and by ghosts, some real, some of her own making. Their steps brought them to a secluded chamber at the far end of the hallway. The door creaked as Kale opened it, revealing a small library filled with books, scrolls, and ancient tomes. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by their arrival. "This is where your father studies the history of the kingdom," Kale said, "and where the curse has been documented. There are accounts, prophecies, and warnings that may help you understand your role." Elara stepped inside, her fingers brushing lightly over the spines of old books. She felt the weight of knowledge pressing down, the silent whisper of generations that had come before her. "I always thought I could avoid this," she murmured. "I thought hiding was enough." But now her voice faltered. Kale stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Hiding was never enough," he said softly. "But you are not alone. Whatever this curse demands, we will face it together." Elara looked up at him, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper flickering in her eyes. Their bond had always been unspoken, a delicate tension that neither dared name, yet it was undeniable. Kale's presence was both a shield and a mirror, reflecting her own strength and fears back at her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Tell me everything," she said. "I need to know what we're facing." Kale nodded and moved to a large, leather-bound tome on a nearby table. He opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with symbols, sketches, and words written in languages that seemed both familiar and strange. "This is the record of the curse," Kale explained. "It is bound to your bloodline. It has lain dormant for centuries, but it awakens when the time is right, or when someone of your strength and lineage comes into the palace. That someone is you, Elara." Alara's fingers trembled as she traced the intricate diagrams on the pages. "What does it do?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "How can it harm the kingdom or me?" Kale studied her carefully. "The curse is subtle but relentless. It targets not just you but those connected to you. It thrives on fear, mistrust, and ambition. Those who seek power may try to use it. It can create conflict, chaos, and even death if not carefully managed." Elara swallowed hard. "And the only way to stop it?" Kale's eyes darkened. "The prophecy says it can be broken only when the heir of the bloodline accepts their power willingly and forms an alliance with someone who is both strong and loyal, someone who can face the shadows without fear." Her gaze met his, and the air between them grew thick with unspoken meaning. She understood instantly who he meant, and yet the thought made her heart race. To face the curse with him would require trust, vulnerability, and courage she had never fully given to another human being, and yet she knew it was the only way. "We have to face it together," she said softly. I trust you, Kale." Kale's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment the weight of their responsibility seemed lighter. "Then we begin," he said. The first step was to understand the curse's reach. Kale led her through the library, pointing out ancient scrolls and journals. Each text revealed pieces of the puzzle, past tragedies, failed attempts to control the curse, and hints at a solution that had been lost to time. Elara absorbed every word, her mind sharp, her heart tense. Hours passed as they studied, the flickering torchlight painting their faces with shadows. Outside, the night deepened, and the palace seemed to settle into a quieter rhythm. Yet the knowledge they uncovered was heavy, weighing on Elara like a cloak of iron. Finally, Kale closed the last book, leaning back against the table. "It is worse than I imagined," he admitted, his voice low. "But not hopeless. You have strength, intelligence, and courage beyond your years, and together we can face whatever comes." Elara nodded, though a part of her feared the unknown. "I will not fail," she said. "I cannot." Kale looked at her, seeing the determination etched on her face, and yet he sensed the flicker of doubt, the uncertainty beneath her calm exterior. He stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her arm. "You will not be alone," he said. "Whatever comes, I will be by your side." A moment passed between them, heavy with emotion, silent understanding, and a bond that neither could fully define. Elara felt warmth spread through her chest, a mix of comfort and something deeper, something that had been growing quietly for months. She had always admired Kale for his strength and wisdom, but now she realized she had come to rely on him in a way that went beyond duty. Their shared focus returned to the task at hand. The curse required preparation, vigilance, and a careful strategy. Kale explained that the palace itself held clues, hidden chambers, secret passages, and enchanted objects that could either aid or hinder them. Alara listened intently, absorbing every detail. "You must learn to trust not just me," Kale said, "but also yourself. The curse responds to fear and doubt. Strength is not just in power, but in clarity of mind and purpose." Alara nodded. "I will try," she said. "But I am afraid, Kale, I cannot lie." Kale's expression softened. "Fear is natural. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it." As they spoke, a sudden noise from the hallway startled them. A faint whisper of movement, a shadow shifting where no one should be. Kale's eyes sharpened immediately. "Stay close," he said. "We are not alone." Alara's pulse quickened. She had suspected that someone in the palace might seek to exploit her secret, but now it was clear that danger was near. The castle walls, which had once seemed protective, now felt like a labyrinth filled with unseen threats. They moved cautiously toward the source of the sound. Every step echoed softly, a reminder that in the world of shadows and chains, even the slightest mistake could be costly. As they turned a corner, they glimpsed a figure disappearing into the shadows. Kale's hand went to the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. "We will need to be careful," he said. "The curse may attract enemies we cannot yet see, and not all threats come from outside." Alara swallowed, her heart pounding, but she stood tall. "Then we face it together," she said. Kale nodded, a silent promise passing between them. The bond of trust had deepened, forged in the tension of danger and the shared burden of responsibility. The night stretched on, and they returned to the library, where Kale began to teach Alara the knowledge she would need to survive. The symbols of protection, the rituals of strength, and the history of those who had faced the curse before her. Each lesson carried weight, each word a key to survival. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn touched the stone towers of Evercrest Palace, Alara closed her eyes, exhausted but resolute. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, and filled with shadows, but she was ready to face it. Kale stood beside her, silent and watchful, the weight of his presence both comforting and urgent. Outside the library window, the first light of day painted the palace walls in gold, a fleeting promise of hope amid the encroaching darkness. But both knew the curse was awake, and the true test was yet to come. Cliffhanger, as they prepared to rest, a distant voice echoed through the corridors, a whisper filled with malice and recognition. Someone had discovered Alara's secret. The shadows had begun to move, and Kale realized that the danger they faced was no longer just a story in books. The castle itself had become a battlefield, and the first strike would come before the sun fully rose. The first light of dawn crept over the towers of Evercrest Palace, painting the stone walls with gold and shadow. The castle, which had felt alive with music, whispers, and secrets, now seemed suspended in a moment between night and day, as if holding its breath. Lady Alara stood at the edge of a balcony, the cool morning air brushing her face. Her sapphire gown shimmered softly in the new light, the dark night behind her leaving only the weight of anticipation. Kale approached silently, his footsteps careful, yet purposeful. He stopped a few paces behind her, letting her moment of quiet reflection remain uninterrupted. "The day comes," he said softly, his voice steady but edged with tension. "The curse will test you soon, and not just you, me, everyone connected to this palace." Alara's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "I know," she replied. "I feel it. The shadows are stirring. I cannot hide, not anymore. And I will not fail, Kale." Her voice, though quiet, carried the resolve that had grown within her over the past days. She had studied the ancient tomes, traced the history of her bloodline, and now faced a challenge larger than any she had imagined. Kale stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We face it together," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." A silence fell between them, filled not with fear, but with the unspoken bond that had grown from their shared struggles. They had fought through knowledge, shadows, and suspicion, and now the final trial awaited. In the courtyard below, movement stirred. Figures cloaked in dark robes had gathered silently, shadows against the rising sun. Ilara's pulse quickened. The whispering warnings she had sensed the previous night were now real, tangible, and close. Kale drew a deep breath, and for the first time, Ilara noticed the sharp edge in his gaze, the same sharpness that had protected her through unseen dangers, now ready for the confrontation that would decide their fate. "Stay close to me," Kale instructed, his hand brushing hers briefly, a silent connection, a reassurance that neither of them would be alone in what was coming. The figures moved forward as one, a silent tide of menace across the courtyard. Ilara's stomach tightened. She had always understood that her identity carried danger, but now the danger was here, unmistakable, and it demanded action. Kale raised his hand slightly, signaling her to remain calm. "We do this together," he said. "No fear, only focus." Ilara nodded. She felt the strength she had cultivated, the courage forged in countless nights of study, in whispered warnings from her father, and in quiet conversations with Kale. The weight of responsibility did not crush her. It sharpened her mind, honed her instincts, and strengthened her resolve. The cloaked figures came closer, but as they reached the courtyard's center, a sudden shimmer of light appeared, a glow of gold and silver swirling around Ilara. She gasped. The power within her, the gift of her bloodline, had awakened fully. Kale's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise but in recognition. He had sensed it before, glimpsed it in small acts of control and subtle command, but now it was undeniable. The true strength of Ilara's heritage had manifested, protecting them, challenging those who would seek to harm her. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if unsure how to confront the glow. One figure stepped forward, a leader among them, raising a hand as if to command the others. But the light expanded, a soft warmth that pulsed with the rhythm of Ilara's heartbeat. Fear, suspicion, and hesitation flickered across the faces of their attackers. Kale moved beside her, his presence steady, his hand brushing hers once more. "Your strength is not just in your heritage," he said quietly. "It is in your courage, your clarity, and your heart. Use it." Ilara took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She focused not on the danger, but on the bond she shared with Kale, the knowledge she had gained, and the purpose she now embraced. The glow intensified, enveloping her in radiant light. The shadows around them shifted, bending, retreating, and dissolving under the force of her will. The cloaked figures stumbled back, their threat dissipating like smoke in the wind. The leader, realizing his power could not overcome hers, fell to his knees, a gesture of submission or defeat. It was hard to tell. Ilara opened her eyes, the light still flickering softly around her. She saw Kale beside her, steadfast and proud, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel victory. Yet the battle was not only against others, it was against the fear within herself. The curse had been a shadow that haunted her, a challenge that demanded courage beyond ordinary measure. She had faced it, not through brute force, but through understanding, wisdom, and the willingness to trust in Kale and herself. The golden light faded gradually, leaving Ilara standing with Kale at her side, unscathed and stronger than ever. The courtyard was quiet now, the threat dissipated, yet the echo of the encounter lingered in the air. Kale reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You did it," he said, awe in his voice. "You faced the shadow and you triumphed." Ilara allowed herself a small, relieved smile. "We did it," she corrected softly, acknowledging the bond that had been forged in fire and fear. "I could not have faced it alone." Kale's gaze lingered on her, full of admiration and something deeper, something neither had dared speak aloud until now. Ilara, he said, you are more than your bloodline, more than the curse or the threats around us. You are extraordinary. Ilara felt warmth rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. And you, she replied, have shown me that strength is not just power but trust, patience, and courage. I could not have done this without you. They shared a brief silence, the weight of their journey and the relief of victory mingling in the quiet morning. Outside, the palace was awakening. Birds sang softly, servants began their daily duties, and sunlight bathed the castle walls. For the first time in days, the world seemed calm, hopeful, and alive. Yet even in the calm, Ilara knew that life as a hidden princess was now forever changed. The curse had been faced, the shadows confronted, and her power awakened, but the responsibility remained. She was no longer a secret, she was a force within the palace, a key player in the fate of kingdoms. Kale's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Your father will want to speak with you, he said. He has seen your strength. I believe he will recognize your courage and the choices you have made. Ilara nodded, the knowledge bringing a sense of pride. She had feared judgment, exposure, and failure, yet she had faced each and emerged stronger. Then we will meet him, she said. I am ready. Together they walked through the palace, moving with quiet confidence. When they entered the throne room, the king was waiting. His expression was calm, but there was a spark of approval in his eyes. He regarded Ilara for a long moment, as if weighing the measure of her strength and wisdom. You have done well, he said finally, his voice both commanding and kind. The curse has tested you, and you have faced it with courage and clarity. Your choices show not only strength but wisdom. You are no longer merely my hidden daughter, you are a leader in your own right. Ilara bowed her head respectfully. Thank you, father, she said. I have learned much, and I am prepared to carry the responsibility of my bloodline. The king nodded, his eyes meeting Kale's. There was a silent understanding, an acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between his daughter and her protector. And you, he said to Kale, have shown loyalty, courage, and judgment beyond measure. You have been tested and you have proven worthy of trust. Kale inclined his head, a mixture of humility and relief. Your Majesty, he said simply, I serve only to protect Lady Ilara and the kingdom. Nothing else matters. Ilara felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper, a connection that had grown through fear, trust, and shared struggle. She looked at Kale, their hands brushing briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been tested and strengthened by fire, shadows, and courage. The king rose from his throne, approaching them both. You have both proven that the power of the heart and mind can overcome the darkest of shadows, he said. The curse has been faced, but remember this: vigilance, wisdom, and courage must guide you always. The world is not without danger, but together you can shape it for the better. Ilara nodded, her heart steady. She had faced fear, darkness, and the weight of a hidden heritage. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace her destiny. And now she realized she was not alone. Kale's hand found hers again, warm and reassuring. Whatever comes next, he said softly, we face it together. Ilara's eyes met his, full of trust, courage, and a quiet joy. Together, she agreed. Outside, the first rays of sunlight bathed the palace in gold, illuminating the banners, towers, and gardens. The kingdom awoke to a new day, one filled with hope, strength, and the promise of future triumphs. The curse had been confronted, the shadows dispersed, and a bond forged in fire now stood strong. Yet Ilara knew, as she looked toward the horizon, that life would always carry challenges. The shadows may return, the world may test her again, but now she had the courage, wisdom, and heart to face them, and she had Kale by her side. The dawn marked not an ending, but a beginning, a promise of love, loyalty, and the strength to shape the fate of kingdoms. And in that moment, Lady Ilara understood that the greatest power lay not in hiding, but in standing tall, embracing destiny, and facing the future with courage and heart.